My name is Patrick Olsen, here with Olsen Motorsports. We are prepping a nice 3.3 turbo case, ready to go together. Crankshaft installed, rods installed, and this is a little bit time-consuming process, but it's one of my favorites, so we're going to go ahead and get this ready to assemble. So we're just putting some bearing lube, installation lube on all these to start. No real particular order for this, but we're going to have the oil pump come in here in a minute with the intermediate shaft and chains. That's been cleaned, assembled, ready to go. Get these on here. And this cool contraption has to go in all as one. And that chain goes down through the second half of the case. This one, we have a cool little tool that holds it up, but for the time being, it can just hang out right there. Make sure we got nice good turning. All those bearings have already been checked for clearance. We're good there. Then we've got a couple special lock nuts and washers. These are not Porsche specific, but very neat. Different kind of lock nut, a steel lock nut versus the nylock. So a little more secure, not going to loosen up on us and come loose in the engine. Those are torqued. Check our nice spinning again. So now, here's our nice tool to hold the chain up. A little early in the process, but it's just kind of nice to get it out of the way. A little bit of a balancing act, but there we go. So now we're going to get the case. Case has been cleaned and prepped with acetone, ready for our nice Worth flange sealant. Nice clean acid brush here. And this is the oh so common point where people ask about the silk thread, and we'll get there in a minute. And then we go to town like Martha Stewart and go to paint, or who else paints? Bob Ross? It's a Bob Ross thing, right? Cooking, yeah, wrong discipline.
Wrong stuff.
So, I think Tim's explained this a million times, but people always ask the question, and how much is too much, how much is too little? It's not really right or wrong. I mean, you can always err on the side of too much, and you can wipe it away if you don't put enough on. Like, I'm a little light here to get good coverage, but if you, I forgot a spot. If you put too little on, you do run the risk of a leak. So if you go too much, you can always wipe a little away. And once the sealant hardens in the absence of oxygen, it's anaerobic sealant. So the stuff that does squeeze out, like right here, it would squeeze out in the case. That stuff does not harden, and the oil will eventually wash it away, and you don't really have to worry about it. Then you get a little that squeezes out the outside of the case and is visual, but you can wipe that away later. No big deal. So the important thing here is just to make sure that everything is nice and even coated, using the brush to get a nice even coat. And the only issue with using the brush is make sure you don't lose a piece of hair in there to cause an issue. But just like the silk thread, that will crush and actually aid the seal a little bit, but you still don't want chunks of hair in there. But again, at this point in the process, the sealant will not harden, so there's not really a huge rush. Once we put the case halves together and start tightening down all the nuts and bolts, that's where time is a little bit of the essence. You do have to move quickly to make sure that the sealant doesn't begin to harden before everything gets tightened. We'll get to that point in just a bit. And even though these inner areas won't necessarily cause an external leak, you still want to apply the orange sealant here just to make sure you don't leak out internally. You can actually lessen the oil pressure of the engine by having an internal leak here. So it's important to still seal these areas off, and to maintain the ever critical bearing clearances that we checked and measured earlier in the process. This. And we have the silk, the magic silk. What does the silk do? Kind of explained before. We're really just adding an extra layer of protection here that does create a tiny bit better seal than just the sealant alone. It's not the most pretty thing, but let's try to aid that seal a little bit. And I do like to go on the outside of the stud. me trim this off.
So is this a specific type of silk that can handle like engine temperature?
What do we got here? This is Continental Aerospace Technologies silk thread.
Alright.
So if it's good for aerospace, I hope it's good for non-aerospace. I don't have an exact answer on that, but yes, we've used it many, many times over again, and really seems to help seal the cases up, and haven't had an issue with longevity or issues down the road. Go. One more big piece. Okay. Okay. get our oil pump O-rings sealed up. Now, let's see how to move on to this gracefully. Our crankshafts ready to go, rods installed. They are not late. I guess I'm gonna bring it over here. So we have our nose bearing cleaned up, ready to go. We have a new O-ring here. And then we'll do a little assembly lube along the inside, because this is a bearing surface. And that will go on there, ready to go. So the very tricky part about all this is hanging this down in there and aligning the pin with the nose bearing. We'll give it our best shot here. This one's up, this one's down, this one's up and down. And I lost one. Could you spin this middle one up for me?
What do you need me to do?
The middle rod. Spin that one up. There you go.
Who says I'm not helping? No? Wait.
I think I got them backwards. I do have them backwards. Yep, that's okay. We'll start over. So this down. This one down. And that one down. All right, let's try again, shall we?
Take two. Try to.
Try to. If they were about 15 pounds heavier, it'd be so much easier. There we go. So now, aligning the pin. There it goes. And we're in. This will remain in, but you still see a little nice easy motion here, just letting us know everything's seated nicely, awaiting the next step. And as you can see, this fun balancing act game. So the next is, there are actually tools to hold the rods in place, but with the assembly lube, we have enough tension to kind of let them hang up like that. Then we just got to make sure we didn't bump our string. Add a little bit more. go. Ah, I forgot one area. Hiding behind the chain. It's okay, we'll get a little orange in there. Just like that one little hair there. We'll get that out of there. Okay. Just last couple final checks. We got extra lube on the intermediate shaft gears. Just help aid some lubrication once it's spinning. We got our 3 rods standing up. We got our orange sealant in. We got our other case half over here, ready to go. Lubed up here as well. Bearings installed. IMS bearings installed, studs installed. We've got our O-rings. We got our perimeter nuts and washers. All right. There we go. There we go. So we leave it up just a little bit just to make sure it's square before I make contact. Because once I make contact, we've got to be in a little bit of a, not hurry, but everything moves a little quicker. Nose bang good, crankshaft good. Yeah, here we go. So some people prefer to do the through bolts first. Some people prefer to do the perimeter bolts first, which I'm doing now. It's really not a right or wrong way to do it. Some people will say one's better. As long as you move quickly and get this case sealed up before the sealant sets, really doesn't matter either way. I find this just to be a little quicker to draw everything together versus doing the through bolts. It's a little more cumbersome, getting the O-rings seated properly. This way I have all my nuts accounted for, my washers accounted for. That way if I have any extras, I know I forgot one. Didn't like that. Didn't like that lock nut. We'll get another one. And we're just snugging up. You can see the orange coming out. Once we final torque, you'll see it come out a little bit more. And again, all that good orange stuff we can wipe away later. Of course, I do have the ones on the bottom side, but there's only 2 down there, so we won't be worried about getting those torqued up until later. And with all of them being initially just snug down, we can just work our way around the perimeter. And get everything torqued up. I like going around the perimeter. That way you don't forget any. Of course, I got the one extra I forgot. Now, even though all these perimeter bolts or perimeter nuts, minus those 2 on the other side, are torqued, we still, once we get this out of here, we still like to make sure to get these through bolts torqued relatively quickly. Like I said, it's not a absolute thrash, but you do want to do it in a timely manner. So before we get too far, be. Always a good idea to make sure that the crankshaft spins nicely by hand, which, there we go, we got a good turn. I'm not going to turn it too far because the rods will eventually get stuck, but that nice by hand turn means we got our good bearing clearances, we got nothing binding, everything's turning nicely, chains are moving, we're in good shape. We're going to keep going. Now we have over here our through bolts. I have everything laid out just because I like to make sure every nut and washer is accounted for as I drop them. But as we go through these, You'll see in this bin we have some O-rings that are lubed up with some fresh engine oil. Each one of those O-rings will go on each side of these through bolts. The washers here are beveled on one side, nice countersink kind of bevel on the inside for the O-ring. We got this nice little install tool to clear over the threads. Take a nice O-ring, pop it over. Our tool's a little short there, but that's okay. So now we slide that up there. You can see on these bolts they have this special step. The O-ring actually goes all the way up against the washer. And we'll bring it over here. And I always get confused which way they go, but it truly doesn't matter. We're gonna go this way. So you slide that one up there, the O-ring will get seated. Our little tool goes back on there. Grab another washer or another O-ring, slide that on. Remove the tool. And we have our washer and nut assembly. As you can tell, they're slippery when your hands are covered in oil. And that will get installed there. Now these will get torqued and tightened, but for now, we can just get it seated by hand and we'll move along. Streamline the process, do all these at the same time. Make sure each one's installed. Now, on these Porsche flat sixes, you just saw we put all the O-rings on. You may wonder why we have two left. Well, there's two studs. There's two studs that were installed in the case that poke through on this side. These also get the O-rings and the nuts. And see, this is where I get confused. Not confused, but my ADD kind of kicks in, and the nuts should have been on this side. We can turn those around, it's no big deal. As I said before, I always forget which way they go, but aesthetically, having the nuts all on this side just kind of makes more sense. And one other bit. Here's the two extra nuts and two extra washers. Beveled washer here. Beveled washer. We still have one nut and one washer. This nut, as you can tell, is not an acorn like these, and this is not a beveled washer, it's just a flat or a wave spring washer. This one goes very specifically on the through bolts. You'll notice that there's one that's hidden way inside there. It's a special takes this special nut, and you have to feed that down in there. Long fingers help. But that's the matching one there. But it's not accessible from the outside of the engine. So that one's always often forgotten. And in fact, that's why I count out my O-rings. I had forgotten to put one here, which makes sense. So why do I have one left? So you always 24 O-rings are, always count them before you start so you know, hey, I missed one. But it's so easy to forget an O-ring. And there we go. Well, in here, just getting all these through bolt nuts started. Now, once these are all started, give my hand a wipe. The important thing when torquing these, get our torque wrench out. Still the old school clicker. That's okay. The important thing when tightening these is the head of the bolt. They both have O-rings on, but you want to hold the head and the bolt so it doesn't turn. Mostly because the O-ring that's underneath here, if this turns while you're holding it, it has a risk of running or risk of tearing this O-ring. Now the other one you say, well, you're gonna turn the nut anyway. True, but for some reason, this is just how I was taught and how the manual says to do it to make sure that this side of the bolt doesn't turn. So we're not gonna go crazy torquing yet, but we're just gonna kind of close up the gap on both O-rings, kind of watch and allow the bolt to start to tighten up. You can see when the O-ring's in there, it has a bit of a gap on both sides. So we're just gonna hold that. We're gonna tighten this up. Just slowly kind of take up the gap. You feel the tension get a little bit more. And you may say, well, why can't you just use an impact and buzz them down? Well, you can, but you know what? Sometimes a little bit longer, more attention to detail with hand tools, is not the worst thing in the world. So this, we just want to make sure we're not over torquing. The torque on these is relatively light, only 25 foot-pounds. So just want to draw everything together nice and evenly, but still, again, not in a hurry, but you want to get these drawn together so that sealant has not cured yet. And it's always a good idea once you have like these sort of snug down. If you remember the rod bearings when we were torquing the rods on the crankshaft, those bearings are not exactly round. This is the same thing here, not quite as severe. The tolerances are a little bigger than the rod bearings, but as you get this stuff drawn down, it's always a good idea to grab your crank pulley and just again make sure everything's still turning nice and freely, which it is. If I have a 17 somewhere, where'd they all go? I'll be right back. You may ask why I'm gonna run all the way back there to get one. Well, because I don't like borrowing people's tools. Go. Okay. Now we'll start from the middle and work out. And now that I've done all the through bolts except that one, I like to just start from the bottom and go through and do every single one final check. That way, just in case you missed one, just for the simplicity of not having to change tools in between, I will do the top row as well. Quick. Can't forget the inner one. And there we have it. One more final check by hand. Now you could always throw a nut and bolt in here, but here we go. You can go all the way around. As long as the chains don't get stuck, we will eventually catch a rod. Where is it? There we go. But yeah, spins beautifully by hand. No wrenches required. You know, everything's gonna turn beautifully once it's all assembled. At the point now, we can go through and double check all the perimeter bolts one last time, and then get the two that are on this opposite side. Kind of omitted those, left those out for right now, but as long as you don't forget them, got these two here. And that's about it. Ready for pistons and cylinders and the rest of the engine. In fact, this is a perfect example of if we were inside the engine, this is, you know, inside the breather plate here, you can see how much gasket material gets squirted out. So inside the engine, once the oil starts circulating, there's no oil up here, but underneath, if you will, starts circulating, it kind of, you know, washes it away slightly, and that will not hurt anything. It will just dissipate into the oil, and that's inside. So then on the outside here, we have this nice bead. but it's kind of ugly and it's gross and we don't want it getting all over everything, so just take a rag and wipe it away.
So in the next episode, what's going to be happening next for this block?
Next episode, or next steps on this, is going to be installing pistons, installing the cylinders, checking our deck height. There's a lot of other checks and balances before we can actually start assembling, but pistons on, cylinders on, heads will follow that. We got cam towers. Then we have basically a complete long block, and all the accessories will soon to follow. You betcha.